Hello and welcome to the first in a new series of webinars hosted by the Jinnah Institute, Pakistan's leading public policy think tank, where we hope to bring to our audience timely, in depth, and forward looking conversations on the transformations shaping Pakistan, South Asia, and the world. We begin our series today at a seminal moment for the country and the region just a few days after a ceasefire has been brokered in what is arguably the most extensive military conflict between Pakistan and India since 1971, and what some have called a near war. To stocktake the events of the past 3 weeks and map future pathways, we're pleased to have with us as keynote speaker Senator Sherry Rehman, founder and president of Jinnah Institute, former federal minister, leader of the opposition in the Senate, and Pakistan's ambassador to Washington. We are also pleased to have with us Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Vice Chancellor of Beacon House National University and Pakistan's former National Security Advisor. Welcome and thank you both for joining us today.
Thank
To
you.
begin, I would like to request Senator Rahman to deliver her keynote remarks on how this crisis is unlike any previous Indo-Pak crisis and what lessons should Pakistan draw from the recent events. Senator Rahman.
Thank you very much, Hassan and Moeed. Let me quickly jump in. One is, I think, I would really like to hear Moeed Yusuf's views on how this ceasefire will, if and when it will hold, and what we can do beyond. But I do want to speak to how this war is different, and please fill in gaps because it is one of the still evolving stories. The fog of war is still alive and well in the region, really partly based on the disinformation war that our neighbor has really cast as a very large shadow on the whole political and information environment. So the ecosystem is still assessing, really, the security ecosystem is still assessing what happened in terms of numbers. Both countries have cited different obviously views, but I'm here to talk about Pakistan, really, and we have our own a view on where this war went. And I think permit me to say that this was after Pulwama. Pulwama was in 2019. Balakot Pulwama was a changing up of the leveling up of conflicts. So conflicts have defined India and Pakistani encounters over the years, and I won't get into that or repeat them. But 2019 took them a notch up after 1971, I feel, because there had been no incursions or strikes into each other's countries since that time. And after the Kargil encounter, we've had crises erupt between the two countries with less and less opportunity to create diplomatic and other off ramps. And we've seen here that since Kargil, this is the first time we've seen 2025 turn into a hot war. It is 87 hours. A lot of things happen, and a lot of things need to be still. I mean, we need to do a stock take of what actually happened. So, in my limited time, and information that I have, I'm thinking that for India, we are in a place where they did something which I call the new abnormal. And that is, we feel should not be and cannot be normalized. Here's why. They have equated an act of terror which took place on illegally occupied Kashmir. You all know about the Pahalgam attack, 26 innocent tourists. And Pakistan condemned immediately and condoled the heinous attack. But before we could say neutral investigation, they had already started linking the dots ineluctably, irreversibly to Pakistan within minutes, without question of, even the thought of or the notion of bringing up a trail or providing hard facts. There was none of that. It took minutes, all of 5 minutes, for the Indian media to be switched on like a, just switched on like a room switch, to start to become a war factory. So they were a fake media factory, which escalated the crisis, in my view, and shrank the options for both countries' political leadership, particularly Delhi, who always seem to need a vanity balm in their particular ecosystem. So we had a situation where India announced that it is going to war. We saw unprovoked attacks on civilian populations the first day, or rather a deep night. And you know what that did was it dangerously escalated to another new abnormal, which is if an attack takes place in India, which we know nothing of, or our fingerprints are not on it, which India insists was without providing any evidence, they go to an act of war. That's casus belli for them, and they have gone straight to an act of war. To my mind, that is a very dangerous new abnormal. And given the trajectories of both countries and where this went, I mean, it looks like they're looking at a path which could lead to mutually assured destruction if this becomes normalized. Now, uh, this is an extreme view, but the escalation spiral was very fast this time. And Moeed can better speak to that. Forgive me for using both your first names because, as I said, you're a part of the extended JI family. But the escalatory spiral was alarming. The third party mediation initially was not providing the diplomatic off ramp it could have. The United States intervened at a stage when they thought dangerous thresholds can be crossed. So this has never happened before, and we saw a situation where um, Pakistan also was pushing back, and secondly, we also saw a situation where Pakistan's conventional deterrence came into play on the first day. So that would redraw, I would suggest, the tactical responses and calculus of India, because both countries were operating. I mean, as has been discussed widely, both countries were operating in a very limited battlefield where I believe they couldn't see each other physically except on radar, and the threat envelope was very tight. The dogfight was, I mean, unbelievable. And in 1 hour, 5 of their jets were down, and there's a he said, she said still going on, but now there's evidence everywhere. And particularly, what went up down here was how the story became China as well, because the untested Chinese data, part of the data as well as hardware was tested. So there was a combination of data and hardware used this time, both sides. And here, China became, their weaponry became their whole standoff weapons became part of the story. So it started looking like a very, very different war. It was fought differently and it endgame differently. So I think that was one of the two things, but much more happened. Both sides, what worries me is both sides demonstrated new risk acceptance. Both parties had, normally, they take things, the escalation was very fast. So this new risk acceptance, the multi-domain part of the war, UAVs, cyber attacks, cruise missiles, information warfare, intense, was building up. And on, I think the third day when they attacked our air bases is when Pakistan decided to respond according to the Article 51 of the UN Charter, well, defend its territory, sovereign territory, its people, and obviously its country. So at that point, we saw things starting to move very fast. It took again all of 87 hours for this to escalate. And that is, I think, a complete new abnormal that has been established. The back channels were established, were somewhat should have been in place, but they weren't. So our CBMs also became victims of this war. For instance, a communication channel. Channels are very important between two nuclear powers. or adversaries. So that didn't initially work. We had escalation seems to be going spiraling up very fast, and very quickly diplomatically, I think India had a new reckoning internationally. Most of its allies were quiet, rather the big alliances it's part of, the big strategic alliances. And while it was the net security provider, is the net security provider for the United States in the region, the equivalence is was obviously jarring. That intervention brought in, and President Trump's, I think, very important intervention did a few things. It established a ceasefire, but what it did, it exposed India's ask for a ceasefire. Now that even Pakistan must have. Pakistan was always never even looking to go into war. So we were war averse, whereas India was not. And we should talk about what India was planning with this war. And here, there's nothing wrong with asking for a ceasefire, I feel, but India does not want to establish that. It does not want to establish that it asked a third party for a ceasefire. It does not want to establish that there is even a military rehyphenation of India and Pakistan, the second thing that happened in my view, or that there was some level of parity. And most importantly, that Kashmir was an international talking point again. So these are the, the broad picture things. I'm sure I've missed a few things, but in my mind, this stood out as a completely new landscape in the region. So I'll
I
speak
think
to that.
I think that's excellent. I'll pick up from 2 points that you made. I love the framing that you've done of the new abnormal. And Modi, right after the ceasefire, in his first speech, sort of, I think, doubled down on this new abnormal by pointing out three sort of red lines of the so-called now Modi doctrine. So I'd like to bring in Dr. Yusuf here. You've heard what India's Prime Minister outlined as his new doctrine, decreasing the threshold for war, and basically allowing any person with an AK-47 to dictate war and conflict between two nuclear neighbors. And at the same time, we've also seen India, as is their usual practice, using sources in the media to walk back from some of what seems to be commitments for the ceasefire. So they've used the word pause instead of ceasefire, and they've used the word understanding instead of an agreement, and they've also sort of walked back from any dialogue on outstanding issues. So, Moeed, how do you see India holding up, its side of the bargain on the ceasefire? How do you see Modi's pronouncements, and this sort of gap in India's own understanding of what it's achieved versus how Pakistan views this situation?
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you, Sherry, for your keynote. Look, two or three things I'd say. First of all, you've got to try and separate what Modi is doing for his domestic audience and what he really means in terms of statecraft, looking at Pakistan and the world. There's been a bit of a jolt to the Modi machinery. Few miscalculations. Number one, I can go after Pakistan and I will get the world to declare it self defense and get a result out of it. Number two, I can't do what Israel has done in Palestine, but that's the mood of the world. So the world will not look at me as draconian if I declare collective punishment. IWT is collective punishment. What else is IWT? If you say I'm getting out of a water treaty and I'm going to starve 250 million people to death, whether you can do it or not is another question, but your intent is collective punishment. Then this idea that I will now declare any terrorist attack as a justification for waging war is collective punishment, right? It's a quintessential definition. Here is, I think, where he's run into a problem. If you were to go down to this level, then Pakistan and India will be at war perpetually because every attack in Balochistan, Pakistan will get up and say, sorry, you are behind it. And here is what we are doing, right? Second, I think he's actually undercut one of his key cards in crisis management. It is a myth that India does not want or like to go to the third party during crises. I'm not talking of peacetime. Peacetime is a different conversation. We can have it separately. But I've written a whole book on this, India
Yes.
Pakistan management. One of my key conclusions is that both India and Pakistan go to the third party. Both are rational in doing that because we don't have a good bilateral escalation control mechanism. Like you said, Sherry, I mean, if you're not talking directly, you don't want to be mutually annihilated. It's only logical, right? The problem is India doesn't want to accept it because it feels that it's making it less stronger, that it's depending on a third party. But they've gone to, so in Mumbai, I'll tell you very interestingly, I interviewed somebody, and the very senior American diplomat is quoted in my book, said India's crisis plan crisis plan A, B, and C was the United States. So, this is not new. This time too, India has gone to the third party, hoping that it would get full support for what it was going to do in the beginning, and then, of course, later on to try and de escalate. What Modi has done by saying this is that the world should come in and back India to fight a war every time Modi decides there's a terrorist attack that he wants to fight a war over. No country in the world is going to do that because they're very worried about nuclear escalation anytime India and Pakistan go at each other. So actually, he's undermined his own ability to use the world, and thus you will see him backtrack from this as well. Then comes your issue in terms of the ceasefire. Look, I think the question you have to answer is, what does India get by reigniting the conflict just after it's got a bloodied nose? Right? I don't think there's any debate left that India left with a seriously bloodied face, actually, not even nose, right? I was just reading today the Chinese, I think France 24 reporting that the Chinese technology in combat has succeeded with flying colors. So unless the Chinese, the French want to undermine their own technology and lie about China being good, I think it's pretty clear now, right? The other part is, please understand this. The world or the media, Indian media may not cover it. Pakistani media hasn't talked much about it. It's great. I mean, I don't want anything that's escalatory. But do understand that India used cruise missiles against Pakistan, right? Unprovoked. That's a serious escalation. They struck your air bases in the middle of your capital, right? Pakistan didn't use any of its arsenal. We were not even close to creating the damage that we can create if we were to do what India did in terms of use of missiles. So India understands this. So I think they'd be crazy. I mean, they'd be out of their mind if they think that they can redo this and Pakistan will just respond in the same way it responded. I would argue if India's response was maybe 30% escalatory, Pakistan was about 5%, right? But that 25% wedge is available. It's available on call. So I think it'll be absolutely crazy on their part. They don't have the political support. I think Trump has sort of, put the last nail in that coffin by constantly repeating that he actually wants India and Pakistan to sit in a room. That's the only sensible thing to do. At the end of the day, ask me, am I happy that there is any kind of war, whether Pakistan won or not? No, because there are 2 billion people whose lives are at risk, right? How do you get back to the room to have a honest conversation? The problem, Hassan, is, I mean, you of course have worked with me and you know this. I've been the biggest proponent of a better relationship between these two countries, right? Even when I was in government, where the back channel was happening, everybody knows now. It's not a secret. But you cannot sit in a room, have an insincere conversation as India just to buy time to get to the point where one fine morning you can come and say IWT is gone, something else is gone. So if you look at this trajectory of dialogue, 6 years have been wasted with not a single thing to show for it. So that kind of conversation I'm not interested in at all. But if the world can talk sense to India and make them understand that this is not the Middle East, you are not going to get away with it, then I think maybe they understand that they overplayed their hand.
So picking up from there, I think towards the end you mentioned about dialogue, and Senator Rahman, you've been an advocate for dialogue between India and Pakistan. For a decade, you've led track 2 processes between India and Pakistan, and many of the people that we've interacted with over the years, one hears the kind of views that they are sort of writing about, and these are elected officials, analysts, and journalists who know Pakistan, who've interacted with Pakistan. But the last 10 years seem to have, in some ways, changed India. And I think people in Pakistan, we don't pay enough attention to what's happened to India as a society. The disinformation that you mentioned when you were giving your remarks, it was just unprecedented. And we've seen unprecedented hubris and vitriol when it comes to Pakistan. Elected members of parliament calling for Pakistan to be dismembered, for this sort of final war against Pakistan. So, this kind of change in India, how do you see that? And what space is left for dialogue rationally when you see a society that seems to be bordering on, if not, indulging in fascism?
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. That's a very important question. And I think here the first thing that came to my mind when this war escalated, and I heard right off the top, I heard some uh, interlocutors, not well known extremists, but middle of the road Congress types, Nehruvian, invested in the Nehruvian agenda. But even that's also exposed its a rather seamy underbelly, which is asking for Pakistan, repeatedly asking, those people repeatedly asking for Pakistan's map to merge with, to undo Pakistan. And this has been an old quibble that rises, but it's not a quibble. You're existentially questioning the identity and entity of Pakistan. So that's really unacceptable at absolutely unacceptable at any point. And it's very hard to be in a conversation with those people. And I said, somebody asked for a current encounter, the web is open, and I said, well, I'm include them. I said, no, I'm not willing to right now, I'm sorry. There is no point descending into a hate factory on our discussion spaces, because that's what it'll become. We do not want to respond in that language. That is not the way we think or act. And it's fairly rational to assume that there would be still some actors in India who understand that perpetual war, which is what India is subscribing to now under Modi, is not the way out, or building a wall of exclusion within the country and then also without the country is not the way out, because that's what they're doing. I mean, I'll give you a small, completely metaphorical example, and it's based in reality, but it's symbolic rather, not metaphorical. There's a bakery, very famous bakery in my part of Sindh, Hyderabad, Sindh, where I've grown up, called Bombay Bakery. It's not turned into Mumbai Bakery. It's a child of many years. And it's something that we all still go to, at least the Sindh walas. I'm sitting in Islamabad, say, all right, please send us cakes from Bombay Bakery. It's run by a Hindu family, a reputable one, and they have friends in society. It's been running for a long time. Its counterpart, called Karachi Bakery in India, was attacked brutally, and the name Karachi was so. This is an example of the level of violence, on wheels, on steroids, violence on steroids that's operating there, and they're almost defining themselves against Pakistan. That seems to be their identity. There is an obsession which we don't have, and I'll speak to that in a minute, because this is what happened there. And Pakistan, which is not which is always under the bat for being extremist, is the country where Bombay Bakery was surrounded by its friends. No one should attack it. It was surrounded by friends. Obviously, it's the heart of Sindh, which is very fairly very tolerant and peaceful. But there it is. That's Pakistan. So the Bombay Bakery was surrounded by friends, and in an act of communal love and protection and inclusion. This is very important. Its counterpart, Karachi Bakery, there has been under attack, and I worry for their survival, because the lynch mob mentality of India has found wheels in the current state ideologies, which has not. I'm not saying that Pakistan hasn't seen its exclusions and extremism, but it's not part of our governing ideologies. Their hate and violence have been valorized as governing ideologies and adopted. I mean, you've got to start changing names. You know the erasure of history that is taking place. But I do think that this time, when they weaponized water early on in the game as a missile strike against Pakistan, this is before the actual 87-hour war started. That this treaty has stood the test of all wars. 65, 71. I was a child through both of them, but I saw them. And there was no question of undermining the Indus Waters Treaty. It was about water, which is governed by several protocols we are not even naming in our narrative. And obviously the actual treaty, which was brokered by the World Bank. Now, instead of talking about how to conserve the Indus Basin, which both countries share, and as you know, we've done work on this in the past, instead of worrying about how Lahore and New Delhi's citizens can actually breathe air that is not 1,000 cigarettes. They are, I mean, those are the two, they compete for the two most polluted countries in the world, cities in the world. I mean, that's really something they should be thinking about. And instead of talking about joint crises, I call this a crisis, that your schools are closed in November and December because of smog, because your winds keep going into each other, and you have to take joint actions. But obviously some local actions, some domestic as well. But the business of meeting the future with a early 20th century mindset, I would even call it 19th, when states and empires were military machines, really. They no longer are. And so, with artificial intelligence, the challenges those pose, the rules governing them or not governing them, rather, and the future of the accelerated challenges that climate change is bringing, particularly to South Asia, particularly to India and Pakistan. There are more land hungry in India than in Pakistan, obviously, because there's more of everything there. And there is far more what I feel climate devastation coming into that country, including water insecurity, including toxicity of air and water, that we needed to have managed together. But the pivots that held civilization together, at least modern day civilization, have been have been unhinged by the Modi regime. This decade has seen an unraveling of both history. I mean, they want to erase history and also erase options for the future. They want to erase options for the future. Those, I mean, all of South Asia, we've done this many times, is living under the overhang of these two neighbors now on a hair trigger to fight, which is where Modi is keeping it, because his speech was about only talking to Pakistan on terror, okay, and only talking to Pakistan about Azad Kashmir, which he called POK. So what message is he giving? While he may not actually break the ceasefire, as Moeed says, the signal I got, he certainly doesn't want to move beyond this debilitating stalemate based on the assumption that Pakistan will suffer more than India. That's been in their minds. But that's not going to happen. Pakistan is finding its way. And India found itself in a shocking new position, honestly, I feel, because none of it saw itself as a big it was seeking a place at the global table. I mean, it's got one, but it eroded its power. It eroded its own status as a responsible player. And in which capacity would anyone allow it to be the regional hegemon now? We cannot, because it is highly irresponsible, as acted highly irrationally and irresponsibly. Because I still don't understand what they were what they achieved, or what grave miscalculation was part of drove part of this era. I mean, it can't just be the Bihar election in November.
Hmm.
It's got to, but Modi has put himself in a political trap. And in Urdu, we say, I mean, I say on TV and in the Senate that I'm sorry, दे वो रियासत का नहीं सोच रहे हैं, वो सिर्फ सियासत का सोच रहे हैं. Surely this is time to think of the रियासत as well.
I
The
think you
state
make.
is surely less important than your politics, as Pakistan came together seamlessly as one
Hmm.
during this war with all its differences, which, and that will obviously, it's a thousand flowers blooming all the time, but that will be in disarray obviously the minute there's no war. But in times of war, when we were tested with, I mean, I'm in parliament, ask me, seamlessly everybody came together. There was not even an APC held.
Hmm. No, I think you made a very powerful argument about the need for dialogue. I think, we are a quarter of the world's population lives in the region. We are the most disconnected region in the world. Our interconnected trade is almost negligible. And we have shared challenges such as water, food scarcity, and multiple other issues. And so I would like to bring in Dr. Moeed here. This idea that Pakistan has given a military stalemate to India. I think that's the view in Pakistan, and certainly the assessment of this conflict is that Pakistan has been able to match India in the escalation ladder, and that we've not even employed all of our conventional capabilities, and therefore we've demonstrated to India and to the world that there is no military solution to our bilateral issues. But conversely, in India, one sees that over the last 10 years, there seems to be this policy of imposing unilateral solutions to bilateral disputes. Now, whether that's Kashmir through Article 370 or the Indus Water Treaty, um, and India is employing multiplicity of tools to coerce Pakistan into accepting its unilateral decisions, such as economic FATF, asymmetrical terrorism activities inside Pakistan, but now also direct military action. Do you think that this conflict has changed the calculus in New Delhi? Or do you feel that the kind of self delusion in some ways that they've created through this, echo chamber of information for themselves will actually end up forcing New Delhi to make even more bad decisions in the future?
Hassan, few points. First of all, um, you have to understand that underlying all of this, I think it's perfectly fine. You have a moment of war, there's sort of a very different conversation, always. But underlying all of this Indian hubris, arrogance, whatever, is one fact that they play on, which is the growing power differential between India and Pakistan. This is not the sort of space to debate and unpack that, but I think we just have to accept that at face value. They feel that they are in a different league. They feel that they have sort of risen much faster than Pakistan. But on top of that, they've made a grave error by constantly hammering a narrative in their own public. And this comes from the Modi Hindutva ideology, I believe, which is that they are too keen to prove that we are growing, but that's not enough. Pakistan is a destitute, debilitated, debt-ridden, crumbling society and state. This combination is what forced them into this space where they thought that they could go in, do something militarily, teach Pakistan quote unquote a lesson, and go home, and nothing would happen because the world would support them and Pakistan would absorb, and that'd be the end of it. Now, this narrative has taken root and shape in India for two reasons. One, they've created it based on their interpretation, fictional interpretation of what has happened between India and Pakistan. 2016, surgical strikes. The idea is, oh my God, look, we did something and Pakistan couldn't respond. So there's victory there. 2019, the pilot is on the ground in Pakistan, on TV screens in the world. What is Modi saying? I am the guy who brought the pilot back. I can assure you, it was a Pakistani decision, voluntary decision, unilateral decision, right? So that's with China. What's the narrative? They didn't capture a single inch of our territory. Galwan, we won. When you start creating these narratives one after the other, then you have a religiously, quote unquote, ordained extremist ideology. You get into the mindset of invincibility. I cannot be touched, and especially these Muslims, these inferior Muslims, the Pakistan's the epitome of that. I can take care of them, no problem. Also, I have the world with me. I think this combination forced them to do this. Let me say something half facetiously and half seriously. If you were to have an enemy as Pakistan, India is the best one to have. Because there is a reality of the growing power differential. But the pettiness in the mind and this urge to prove that you are dominant every year, 2 years, 3 years, IWT, crisis, etc., pulls them right back where they belong. I'm reminded of a former US ambassador to India, Tom Pickering, very, very well-known ambassador, who, once speaking somewhere said, the problem with India is you go to India and start talking about Pakistan. They say, oh, no, don't talk about Pakistan. We are in the China League. Talk about China. China is the thing. Pakistan, nonsense. And then for the next 2 hours, they'll only talk about Pakistan. So this obsession that they have with Pakistan, which keeps coming back, actually pulls them right back. So in a way, I have no worry about this power differential or whatever it is, because they're simply unable to think like a mature strategic power, right? I'm not gloating over this, by the way. I actually think for the region, it's very important for Pakistan and India to get along. But the getting along has to happen as two sovereign states maturely sitting together and deciding what things they want to move forward on the basis of equality. Equality, not 1 equals 1. In some things we'll be ahead, in other things they'll be ahead. But it has to be a civilized relationship. And now, Hassan, I'll tell you, I think there is a moment here where the world is realizing something else. India did what it did on Russia and Ukraine to the West. You've heard, obviously, the tensions on trade and visas, etc., even in the first Trump regime. I think there is now a conversation. Is this the India that we are creating as a counterweight to China? They can barely compete with Pakistan. So, all in all, I'm not here to, sort of suggest that war as it's happened is the goal. Pakistan doesn't want a war. It doesn't suit us. It doesn't, and that's why Pakistan, frankly, had talked about no escalation right after the planes had dropped from the sky. It's India that actually pushed this. So I think they've made a number of mistakes. It's time for us to see what we can logically convince the world on where they've gone haywire. And if they do that, the world is going to be at a loss, not only Pakistan. And then look at things that are very quickly going to close down the power differential, which are about economics, which are about the society and all of those things, right? This combination, I think, will get us to a new point. I just feel sorry in some ways. Look at us talk. I feel sorry for the millions of Indians who are actually the victims of this Modi narrative and ideology, right? I mean, we have all three of us know many Indians who are exceptionally sane, exceptionally qualified, no voice, right? Even people who sat on the table with us for years as track 2 dialoguers trying to build peace ultimately revealed that they couldn't be relevant in India. They couldn't survive in either politics or analysis unless they came out saying that Pakistan is evil. We can take down Pakistan. We can annihilate Pakistan. We can finish Pakistan. If the biggest Pakistani hawk said this here, you and I would get up and say, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Why are we being immature, right? So I think that society there, that problem lies. It's not going to go away while Modi and Kotri are there. It's a very thin-skinned Kotri, by the way. You puncture it, and they feel really, really hurt about it. So, I'm not sure they're liking any of what we are saying, but, it is what it is.
So let me shift gears.
I just want to, I just want to address some of what Moeed said, or rather come in there. I think it's really important for us to have a quick look at, how far this Indian posturing continues. Just on the near term, Moeed has said, I don't think they've always wanted a ceasefire. Okay, look, we know they've always wanted a ceasefire and asked for it, but they've never expected to have it said by the third party, okay,
No, Hassan,
which
I'm just saying I hope they don't break it. I mean, I'm
yeah,
not saying they
no, so
will not.
I want to move beyond the hope. I want to see, have they understood that they punched above their tactical weight, and also have they understood that, I mean, how there's a lot of talk that there are questions being asked in the Indian media. I'm not sure that's a fringe element entirely, but I think the messaging that continues in India has triggered a huge amount. What some people say is, "Oh, let them do it." It gives them the space to come back from the corner they come out of the corner they've painted them into, like a vanity balm, okay, like a balm that soothes their egos, because those are at play. There is an intense political narcissism, geopolitical narcissism at play here, like a backyard bully, very 19th century. I'm sorry, this is just not the 21st century, but it is at play. Then that is leading analysts with a mode, and they're deploying language that sort of speaks to rationality, but actually they're promoting fairly irrational outcomes, such as a velvet takeover of Pakistan. Things like that are being said in many spaces, and I mean, they strike me as ludicrous. And on the other hand, you have Pakistan's in a broader public response, because we are embedded, we're not policy elites, we are embedded in our people. The two countries, Moeed and Hassan, how did they respond? Look at, even today, Pakistan is making fun of the war, making fun of New Delhi, of course, but not in nasty, there's no violence there.
Not abuse. There's no
Yes,
abuse.
or abuse, and equally making fun of ourselves. There is nothing but from a spectrum of sophisticated to borderline vaudeville satire raging all over Pakistan. That seems to be the public response. They are not obsessed. Our people honestly are not obsessed or anxious about India. This is some kind, and that is not the case over there, that they need this constant vanity balm to soothe their apprehensions and anxiety or neuralgia about Pakistan. What is this neuralgia, and where does it come from, and where will it go? Because the public too are now beginning to be part of the Modi, I mean, it's like a PTSD now. So what is going on here? Their responses are absolutely obnoxious, and mainstream journalists behaving, totally off balance. So I think we do
I
need to
I
do that.
I do agree with you, and my assessment is that I think that it's not really seeped into the Indian sort of political dispensation, even if the Indian military understands that there's a stalemate with Pakistan. But I do think that there's also this criticism of Modi. Now we're hearing the Congress and many other people criticize Modi and the government for the ceasefire, because you see, the BJP and Modi for several years used to criticize Congress for ceasefire in 65 and 71 in parliament. So now, there's a lot of criticism of Modi happening. And perhaps, the reason why India has taken such a sort of opaque language when it comes to the ceasefire is because, its stability is directly proportional to the amount of criticism that Modi gets, and whether he's able to sell this as a victory for himself. So, Moeed, sort of shifting gears a little bit over here, and you can talk about, whether you think that this is the correct assessment, but also looking at, the role of the US. Now, the US has come in, and initially, the assessment in Pakistan was that the US was hesitant. And I think JD Vance sort of verbalized that hesitancy when he said that this is between two countries and we don't want to be a part of this. And we didn't see that much activity. Regional countries, and this is true in 2019 as well, during Pulwama, that the Gulf countries, UK, China, Russia, were more active than the US. Eventually, of course, when the situation got out of hand, the US comes in and brokers the ceasefire. And then it comes out with a couple of statements by Marco Rubio and then Trump. And they actually completely sort of destroy the strategic policy of India vis-a-vis Pakistan for the past 30 years, as I see it. They say three things. Number one, they talk about mediation. Number two, they call on both countries to have dialogue, something that India's foreign minister for the last 10 years has been saying that we will not have dialogue with Pakistan. And number three, Trump mentions a solution to the Kashmir issue. So how do you see America's role in this? And do you see that there is a possibility for America playing even a greater role in bringing both countries to the dialogue table?
Thank you. I'll try and be brief because I know you're on the clock. So one comment before this on the society and what we were talking about. I'll give you a very radical thought. Allow Indians to come into Pakistan in whatever numbers they want. What's happened? There is a make-believe Pakistan in India right now. The destitute, the finished, the debilitated. Let people come and see the reality. We are a country that suffers from a far worse perception than the on-ground reality. Anybody who hasn't been to Pakistan and lands in Pakistan says, oh my God, what's wrong here? This is an absolutely normal country, right? So I think out of the box. If you are being poisoned by a particular message, the only way you get out of that is to go and see the reality for yourself, right? I think it will change a lot of things. I don't think India will let its citizens come. By the way, you do know that if an Indian citizen needs to come to Pakistan, even if you give them a visa, they have to get clearance from the home or whatever the ministry is or whatever it may be, for at least the ones that one deals with in our work. That's that. Hasn't nothing changed. So this third-party intervention is identical. I talk about this in my book as brokered bargaining. This is exactly that. Go back to Kargil and start. The difference is the timing at which the third party shows up. Otherwise, there's a very clear routine. India and Pakistan go at each other, whatever the reason may be. The third party gets worried of its own accord, not because India and Pakistan have asked it to, because they're really worried that these two developing countries are neighbors, have nuclear weapons. If the Cold War got so many close calls, how could they survive? How could they manage it without risk, right? They show up. When they show up, traditionally, they've asked for de-escalation before anything else. And then they talk about who's wrong, who's right, what should happen, etc. Every time dialogue is part of that message. Every time de-escalation before anything else is part of that message. Yes, Kashmir so frontally is not part of that message, but you can attribute that to the personality of President Trump, perhaps, in terms of the boldness with which that was put out. This time, the difference was that in the beginning, there was vocalization of a hands-off approach. Usually, it's not a vocalization. Even in Kargil, if you look, there was a hands-off approach in the beginning, but there was no vocalization of it. This time, publicly, the US came out and said, I'm not interested, essentially. That's why the regional countries jumped in even more. The regional countries are always involved. Even the Chinese are always, everybody is trying to get de-escalation, right? That vocalization unnerved people because we didn't know whether that was going to last throughout the crisis. And I think it gave India this false optimism that, okay, if the US is not, that means the US knows that we are going after Pakistan, they're not going to touch us. I think that's where they got it wrong. As soon as they jumped in, within 24 hours, the US went back to its exact old playbook and said, sorry, no risk. We don't care whether it's 1% or 30%. And all the regional countries jumped in. So there's no difference. This is the playbook. India miscalculated it, perhaps emboldened by 2019, because at that time, the first strike was seen as a self-defense. And the world kind of stood back and said, that's okay. As soon as Pakistan responded, brought the pilot down, the world was again there to say de-escalation. So no difference. The third party always does this. Yes. India perhaps miscalculated more, and the Trump administration is far more vocal. And is the language they're using is irritating India a lot, right? But otherwise, it's a third party. India doesn't want the third party to come in the next crisis, God forbid if there is one. It's only one way. Only one way. Sit down and create a bilateral escalation control mechanism, which requires us to talk not only about the crisis, but also about things that create the crisis. That's what India has been avoiding for 10 years.
Thank you, thank you. So, Senator Rahman, just closing thoughts on what do you think the future pathway is for the region,
So
for
I think
India?
we spent too little time on future pathway. We were too busy deconstructing the crisis. There's so much to say, and Moeed also had important thoughts here. But just a quick one about the radical thought. Actually, not so radical. We brought 80 parliamentarians, BJP parliamentarians, to Pakistan. It was, of course, the good old Vajpayee days and good old, respectively, because initially, when four parliamentarians went across the Baga border, which I led, they told us not to come, and there were black flags all the way to Delhi from Amritsar in the Shatabdi train. But when we got there, they changed their minds and met with us, and we then invited back their parliamentarians. 80 landed, exactly what you said. Oh my God, people don't have horns on their head. You're all not in, your faces are not covered. All of that went on, and great bonhomie and sort of creation of space took place. Little mini constituencies of peace began to ink blot out, as you know. But that environment does not exist right now. For parliamentarians to come into this country, please tell me, in the kind of media environment you have in India, and the phobic behavior that is exhibited, that's not possible. I mean, I would not be wanting to go there in this environment, certainly not. And I've been, as you know, one of the oldest peaceniks going around. So I would certainly not. I mean, their behavior has been offensive. And moving forward, I think we have to worry about, and then I triangulate with both of you. Hassan, you're sitting in Washington. It will not, space for moving forward will not be created without a third party or without fear of Chinese, you know, escalation, which is, China is a quiet strategic player. They don't invest in military escalation, but in this round, they stood by like the iron brother that they are. They were first to come out with a statement unequivocally. And you also saw the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, their representative, leaving Pakistan, almost hit by, when the Noor Khan airbase was bombed. So that's how much, while he was still in ours, he left our airspace, but they were bombing our airspace then. So India needs to think about where its violent belligerism is taking it. I still don't see any rational end game in their minds, other than midterm political gains for Modi. I don't even see long-term political gains. I don't see a rational end game in their mind. The ceasefire may or may not hold, but it is a very ramped up a space of exclusion, where they have built an iron curtain between India and Pakistan, especially over the water. And they think that Kashmir is off the table, because now, if there's any conversation, it will be about the IWT. So I think it's very important for us to reiterate that both are on the table
Yeah.
all the time. And there has to be a table, or there's perpetual war. Simply that.
I think you're close. I think that sort of sums up where we're at when it comes to India Pakistan. That there has to be dialogue, or we are heading towards a perpetual situation of perpetual war and conflict between these two nuclear countries, which I think nobody in the world. This is unprecedented. Not throughout the history of the world have two nuclear powers had the kind of military exchange directly that we saw recently. So I think a lot of thought needs to go in. Thank you very much once again, both of you, for your very thoughtful and very sort of thought-provoking ideas, and for our viewers, this was excellent. There's so much to unpack here. I think we can have multiple webinar series on like every element of this equation right now. So thank you once again. It was a pleasure having you both, and hope that you can join us again sometime soon. Thank you.